Birmingham, a city of centres. We believe Birmingham has the potential to be transformed into a destination centred around multiple diverse sites, each complemented by a variety of mixed-use neighbourhoods. Looking to the future, the way we live, work and shop is changing significantly and at rapid pace. We need to respond to this. With the growth of city living over recent decades, we have already laid the foundation to bring this vision to life. Our City of Centres aims for 2040 include establishing central Birmingham, a collection of vibrant, distinct and livable neighbourhoods with services and amenities that ensure residents can meet their daily needs within walking and cycling distances. Supporting residential development at densities that make local services and public transport viable. Ensuring that communities have the resources, skills and support to build resilience within their areas. The heart of Birmingham stretches further than its traditional city centre. We are a collection of centres that have evolved over time.
So hello and welcome to the next conversation on Birmingham City Council's Our Future Plan 2021. The theme you're going to hear about in this conversation is around the City of Centres. The Council really wants to hear your thoughts and views on our future city plan and the 2040 goals that are laid out within it. This is your chance to get involved and air your views, share your ideas and thoughts. You can do this by responding to the Be Heard survey that is linked in this broadcast post. So I'm Dan Hickman and I'm the Regional Growth Director for Jacobs. We have offices in central Birmingham. We're a global solutions provider that helps transform cities by making them more connected and more sustainable. We're currently supporting the City of Melbourne on their journey to creating a 15-minute city. We also work with many cities across the globe and the UK to meet their ambitions. We hope that the next 60 minutes or so help you understand what the City of Centres theme is all about and help you visualise what the City of Birmingham could become. So my role in this webinar is just to facilitate the discussion between the expert panel members. Excited to hear their thoughts and perspectives on a 15-minute neighbourhood. So I'll ask our panel members now to introduce themselves and say who they are and what they do. So if I can start with Biljana Savic from HS2 to go first. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm wearing two hats today as a director of the Academy of Urbanism, and that's an international network of professionals engaged in creating, sustaining great places from streets, neighborhoods to cities and regions, and also as you said, as head of urban design and integration at HS2, very relevant for Birmingham given the impact that the HS2 program is already having and will continue to have on the city for many decades to come.
Okay, thank you. And could I ask David Hardman to go next, please?
Yes, so David Hardman, I'm Managing Director for Bruntwood SciTech in Birmingham. Bruntwood SciTech is a company that is based in a number of cities around the UK, and we're there to promote thriving innovation districts. Based in Birmingham at the Innovation Birmingham campus, and now about to launch the Birmingham Health Innovation Campus, all about bringing innovators together to drive the economy.
Thank you, David. And Maria, please.
Yes, hello. I'm Maria Vasilako. I'm kind of also wearing two hats today. For one thing, I have served as Vienna's deputy mayor, responsible for urban design and climate protection for 10 years. And on the other hand, I am the founder and director of Vienna Solutions, which is an experts network from Vienna and Austria, focusing on sustainable urban development and urban solutions.
Okay, thank you, Maria. And Naomi?
Hi, so I'm Naomi Fisher. I'm founder and strategic director of Roam, which is a charity that facilitates children's freedom in the natural environment and also the wider agenda of children's independence in the public realm. I'm also a community architect. I run a small practice in the city and working primarily with third sector organisations in communities throughout the city and the West Midlands. And we really strongly advocate a community-led and grassroots up approach to this type of development. And I'm involved very much in a lot of initiatives in my own local area. Kind of, I think if I'm going to advocate it in other areas, I've got to do it myself. So I'm involved in quite a lot of initiatives about promoting active travel in my own neighbourhood and community, and how they can promote community cohesion and connections amongst people.
Thank you, Naomi, and thank you, panelists, for doing that. So to give the conversation some structure, we've set out why, how, and what framework. So we'll start with the why. Why do we need to look at a 15-minute neighbourhood, and why a city of centres approach is important? And then we'll go into the how. How do you go about creating these 15-minute neighbourhoods, and how is it suitable for Birmingham? And then finally, we'll look at what. So what are the benefits? What are the results of a 15-minute neighbourhood? So let's start with the why. So why do we need a 15-minute city or neighbourhood? The plan talks about how we live, work and shop, and how that's changing significantly and at a rapid pace. And the 2040 goals are, that they put in the plan, the City Council have put in the plan, are in response to this. So the plan mentions how Birmingham has this great opportunity to create a city of centres, and the multiple destinations across the region and the community that the communities can be proud of. So if I can turn to Naomi first and ask, why do we need to change and look at these concepts defined within the plan, and what are our community's needs at the moment?
Well, I think there's a convergence of so many issues that mean that 15-minute neighbourhoods or that kind of concept is just needed ever more than even, I mean, it's not a totally new concept. Back in the 90s, the likes of Richard Rogers were talking about the compact city and multinodal neighbourhoods, but it still seemed to be only really talked about in particular circles at that time. I think now the environmental agenda has really pushed things. Car dominance, I think a lot of people have suddenly started to notice, is actually very damaging in many ways, and that promoting cycling and walking just has to be part of the solution to that, especially public health crisis, in terms of both people's physical health, but also their mental well-being, and people feeling disconnected from their neighbourhoods because they have very little engagement in it. I think as a city, we've, a lot of our areas have got really good densities as a starting point, albeit that I think we need to embrace higher densities, especially if we're going to attract commercial investment in our local centres. There's a large proportion of people in this city. We often talk about how we're such a young city, under 25s, who don't drive or can't drive, and we've not got to forget children in that. And these days, a lot of children are driven everywhere. They have a bigger disconnect with their local neighbourhood in terms of navigating it, because even when they are driven, they're sometimes got their head in an iPad. And, in terms of going forwards for people who to care about their local spaces, they've got to have that that connection with them. So I think, it's an equality issue as well, because there's people who can't drive. When you've got car dominance, meaning that the decline of a lot of local high streets, because there's not enough people to use them, you've got to kind of force the issue a bit. With the pandemic, I think we've got, post-pandemic world, that has added an extra thrust to this whole thing, because suddenly people who weren't that connected with their neighbourhoods previously, who were travelling, commuting every day to work, suddenly are in their neighbourhoods. They feel much more of a connection. They've got a much stronger reason for that investment, because going forwards, I think recent research said 40% of people think that they'd like to work either at home or remotely 40% of the time. And the risk of losing a lot of our local independent businesses has become very apparent to people. And I think that in all of the communities I'm working in, there's a lot of very similar conversations going on about how can we make sure we save our local businesses. And whereas before, I think people who commuted to elsewhere, they just saw their home as, they just saw their neighbourhood as where their house was really, rather than the connective things. And things like WhatsApp groups amongst streets. I know my street's an example, that there's so many where suddenly you've got much more connection between neighbours and local economies. Setting up even on my street, there's a decorator, there's a roofer, and then people are all using each other's services. So actually suddenly you know, the likes of the plumber or the electrician aren't necessarily having to travel so far to work. So it really is a sweet spot at the moment where I think if we don't take this opportunity, and for the environmental push as much as anything, you know, we'll have really missed it. And I think something like the concept of the 15-minute neighbourhood, you know, it's imperfect in some ways, but you've got to have something, I think, a phrase like that people can latch onto. And just one final point, I think, to say, though, is that we've got to be really careful that just because on a map you can say that you can walk between two places in 15 minutes, we've got to make sure it's safe. Birmingham has one of the highest rates of pedestrian fatalities on the roads in the country. A massive amount of journeys every day. I think it's 250,000 under a mile are taken by car in the city. There's some places people don't feel safe to walk, and that's where government, local authority, they've got to be there to put that infrastructure in, because local communities can't do that for themselves. They can do a lot of stuff. So I think that 15-minute neighbourhood, it's not just a geographical, physical thing. It very much is about making it safe, and also for everybody's individual experience. So, you know, some older people, you know, how long it gets them to between places and the kind of infrastructure they need, and small things like a bench to sit on at intermittent points where they might need to rest at the top of a hill. I've come across that through stakeholder engagement in communities. So it's really understanding it from the perspective of not just you know, a 35-year-old white male can go in 15 minutes and feels comfortable and safe too. So that's the beginning of it, but yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Naomi. And I like that point that this is not about interconnectivity of infrastructure, that the reason and the need for change is to create that community spirit within the communities and the wider activity of that community voice. I like that. And certainly safer and healthier streets, and the connection to Brum Breathes and the clean air zone is apparent there as well. Perhaps I could ask Maria to come in with an international perspective on this, and you know, my feeling is that COVID has shone a spotlight on some of these issues. It's these issues and challenges that cities face have been around for a while. I think COVID has accelerated some of those trends. So I'd just like to hear that the need for change from an international perspective and what you've seen in your experience, Maria, please.
Well, let me start first of all somewhere else, because, you know, speaking about the whys, I would like to invite you to think together with me about the very crucial question: what is a city? And how is a city designed that we love? Because clearly there are places that we all love and that we all feel ourselves drawn to. And how are these designed? And what you will always find out is that these are places that are full of life, where the streets were not actually designed solely for private car use. They were designed for people. And suddenly you find out that whenever you visit a city, for instance, even as a tourist, where will you go first? It will be most probably where there is at least a considerable degree of traffic calming, where you have at least bright sidewalks, where you have shading, and what is even more important, where you have shops and cultural institutions and restaurants and bars and urban life. So I personally believe that creating centers and sub-centers and neighborhood centers that are full of life leads us to the types of cities that we love, and we live because we want to and not because we have to. Now, if COVID and the COVID crisis has shown something, then I think that we have all rediscovered the importance of the public realm, and especially the importance of our own neighborhoods. Because, you know, in the first phase, we were all asked to stay home. And what it then becomes is stay in the neighborhood. And I always say, you know, stay home presupposes that you have a nice home that you can afford. And stay in the neighborhood also presupposes that you have a beautiful neighborhood that you love, and where you can actually access everything you need within a few minutes walk. So if COVID crisis has also shown something, then it is that those neighborhoods that do offer what you need for everyday life, you know, within a couple of minutes walk, are the ones that have proven to be the most resilient, also economically. Whereas large shopping streets at city centers that were extremely dependent, most notably on tourism, were the ones that are struggling right now and that will be struggling, as a matter of fact, also at least in the 1 or 2 years to come. Now, I think that this shows that clearly that we have to invest in our neighborhoods and that there's a lot that can be done and has to be done. Just to give you one example from Viennese experience, we have found out that if you take a look at retail, they have been struggling with deliveries and internet, providers for quite a while now. And what we found out is that wherever the city invested in pedestrianization, in wide-scale traffic calming, and in a beautiful public realm, these streets turned out to be much more competitive than others. And whenever shops are open, because right now, because of COVID, they tend, to open up for a few weeks and then close again, and then are open again, and so on and so forth. The first places where people rush immediately are the ones that give us exactly this neighborhood feel, where you can have everything you need, and where, once again, we have invested in the quality of the public realm. So I would say, taking a look, to sum it up, in international experience, you will see everywhere when it comes to the why, that the places that we love all over the world are neighborhood centers, as a matter of fact, or centers with beautiful design. And we will be looking, in the next hour, more in detail on how to get there.
So much in that first 10 minutes of conversation. I love the city for the people, and the more resilient we make cities, the more we'll create a city that people want to be in rather than have to be in. I absolutely really do like that. So I suppose we've started with a strong why. There is a need to do something. The opportunity that we have is fantastic, but we can't do nothing. We need to do something. So how do you go about realizing these changes? How do we deliver the 2040 goals that are in the plan? The plan talks about residents needing to be able to walk or cycle within 15 minutes of the place they reside. So perhaps I can go to Biljana and ask, how do you go about making these 15-minute neighbourhoods, and how does the polycentric makeup of Birmingham help?
First, a bit of a reflection on what Naomi and Maria said, if I may. It's interesting. The first thought that I always have when people talk about 15-minute city concept is, this is not new. This is what urban planning is about, has always been about, because most of our towns and cities are polycentric. And, I remember something that Professor Bill Hillier at UCL used to say when he tried to describe what city structures are. And he would say that cities are networks of centres in the sea of residential use. I mean, centres, there are with different catchments and different role and different, place in the pecking order of centres. So, everyone from Ebenezer Howard onwards tried to kind of illustrate that through their diagrams and through their sort of theoretical works. And Richard Rogers and Ann Power, again, around the turn of this century, around the early 2000s, talked a lot about this concept of hierarchy of centres and how they work to kind of create sustainable cities, compact and sustainable cities. So these are the structures that cities like Birmingham and London developed organically over centuries, with original clusters of villages that grew and merged over time. And this is the city structure that is not going to disappear. It's going to obviously remain in place, albeit with this kind of the shifting balance that we're now seeing. And I think live in a very interesting time for urbanists, for all the people involved in placemaking, because we are seeing this shift in the role of big city centres as opposed to local centres, and much more emphasis on quality of life and quality of environment at local level in our 15-minute neighbourhoods. What's also interesting to me, and this is me talking with my Academy of Urbanism hat on, is this, what's happening at the level above, a single city, with the trends that we're seeing in lifestyles and work styles, and mid-COVID, we are seeing a plight of people from London, from kind of the top tier cities into smaller cities and town. In other words, we're seeing this kind of changing population pattern at a larger scale, and I expect that's not going to disappear. That's not going to stop post-pandemic. And I was just looking at the latest Ipsos Mori poll only a few days ago, and they've asked people what are the things that you're looking forward to returning to post-pandemic, and commuting to work was firmly at the bottom of that list. So people won't be returning, full-time, I think, back to their offices, and there will be some kind of hybrid model, and therefore the demand for workspaces within city centres, those main employment centres, will be lower. So let's move on to HS2. How does a big infrastructure project like HS2 align with this 15-minute city concept, and how does it align with this changing sort of work style and lifestyle trends? And that kind of link isn't always obvious, I would think. So at national level, and this is kind of what we keep saying to everyone, it has a crucial role in connecting the nation and connecting over 30 million people, and addressing that last point that I made, and this is about boosting the role of second and third tier cities, making them more accessible for businesses, for leisure, for visitors. But it's even more important to say that it's boosting the role of not only the cities that are on the HS2 line, but that are connected to it. By releasing capacity in the local network, HS2 will make it easier to access jobs, schools, shops at a local level. And we'll be releasing capacity at around 100 stations around the country. And that, again, is a point that not many people know about. Quality of environment is a really important factor for the success of the 15-minute city. HS2 will remove a huge amount of car and freight traffic off our roads, remove the need for short domestic flights across the country. So that will have a massive impact at local level in terms of environmental quality. It will contribute a significant area of new habitats, of new green area, new woodland, and again, we see in the news, stuff about HS2 impact on woodland. Actually, people forget that we will not only replace all the trees that we have to remove in order to construct the railway, but we'll be adding 30% on top of that in terms of woodland and habitat area. Again, with massive impact at local level on quality of life for people who live in area impacted by HS2. And I'll finish with another thought, and this is about the fact that at local level, there will be a fantastic opportunity for local and regional partners to work with us, with HS2, to realize all sorts of improvements, environmental improvements, landscape improvements, realize growth and regeneration opportunities that the completion of HS2 will open. These are the opportunities that go beyond HS2 remit, but will be kind of open after the completion of HS2 to our partners to consider and to deliver. So we are the biggest land assembly project in the country. There is no doubt about it. We are acquiring land that will be needed in order to construct the railway, but a lot of that land will not be needed for operational purposes post-construction. This is where my team is focusing on looking at those opportunities and starting to talk to regional and local partners, including West Midlands partners in Birmingham and around Birmingham. We're talking about how that land could be used to contribute to better neighbourhoods and cities, in a way how it can contribute to the success of the 15-minute city concept, with better pedestrian cycling links, landscape improvements, sustainable development, enhancing access to blue and green networks, etc. So again, the success of all of this will be really down to how well we're working together to make it happen. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Billy-Ann, and no doubt, you know, the catalyst of HS2 to the city of Birmingham will bring that job creation and investment. And it's nice to hear that the national improvements in connectivity, as well as the local connectivity and the quality of the area will improve. So my thoughts then, I suppose, would then go to how innovation and from a more local perspective of a business sited in Birmingham and Bruntwood, and I'll turn to David and perhaps ask how you know, this concept could be realised through innovation and digital sectors. If you don't mind expanding on that, David, please.
The important thing about innovation, it happens as people come together. So it's about bringing people and making them, or allowing them to talk to each other, people with ideas, people with experience and skills, and bringing the funding together to actually allow them to take those ideas and create new products and services, which means it's all in the mix of the talent that you have available to you. Over the last 50 years, that the policy has been around what they call the triple helix of academe, industry, and the public sector working together. And typically, people will immediately look to Silicon Valley or Cambridge or other cities, hotspots of innovation across the world. That sort of triple helix is an interesting one, but looking forward, there's a quadruple helix where the citizens of a city start to impact on that whole thing, and about creating opportunity for those citizens in the city is really what will drive the growth. Naomi said before that there's a lot of this that's not new, because what I've just described is the industrial city of the Industrial Revolution. The 18th and the 19th century bringing together of manufacturing clusters, connecting them well with transport, was absolutely what drove the UK's Industrial Revolution. Thousands of small firms in local supply chains created employment for people living and working in those cities, in those communities, and they were able to walk to work. Well, that's sort of exactly what we're now talking about doing again. The other key thing that was interesting about then and now is it's largely driven by individuals, key individuals, more than it is by government and by the public sector. You know, the Birmingham, the history is through the Lunar Society, that group of people, those polymaths, those engineers, people like Bolton, Watt, Murdoch, Wedgwood, who came together and actually helped develop the city as it was, creating the infrastructure, the housing, and everything that actually drove the city. So entrepreneurs then become that driving force for city-led innovation. And I think what we're now seeing, as the economy is changing again, then that is coming to the front again. So obviously, as manufacturing disappeared in the 1970s in Birmingham, 50% of the workforce still was in manufacturing. Today, it's about 10%, which is about the same as any other city in the country. We're moving our economy away from a resource-based, carbon-limited economy to a knowledge-intensive economy. The beauty of that is the knowledge economy, the more you use knowledge, the more you create. So it actually is a renewable resource, which creates an interesting opportunity for us all. But it all comes back to innovation is driven by compact areas of clusters, people coming together to translate their ideas into value. So the importance of place in all this is absolutely crucial. And as we look forward, it's the cities where everyone is moving to. The 24/7 living that we see in cities is where we're going to drive the innovation from. It's an interesting one if you don't want to get sidetracked, but the whole issue around the COVID situation and the hollowing out there's been of cities in recent times. Part of the problem there is that those knowledge economy businesses are busy working from home at the moment, and they're not, but they're not, as a result, supporting the local businesses, the cafes, the restaurants, the pubs and bars, and they're all shut. Hopefully, and I believe it will be important that those companies start coming back into the city, because otherwise innovation is going to be, we're going to be starved of innovation. So they come back, the pubs, bars and restaurants open, and life starts moving forward in a way that has really starting to change the way in which our high streets look. So moving away from retail, but more a focus on food, leisure, and a place to work. So that connected piece is important. You know, people will then turn around and say, well, of course, we're doing all this all the time today, you know, the virtual stuff. And increasingly, algorithms are leading the way in which things can be done in a connected world. But it all comes back. The innovation, at the moment at least, is not coming from AI, it's coming from individuals and people. And those individuals and people are in cities. And as long as we don't bury them and we allow them to interact with each other, we'll get the innovation, and that will provide opportunity for the citizens in the city.
Thank you, David. I like how we've almost connected the why there to the how, and the innovation is one of the drivers that will help us create these concepts. Also, the individuals drive this. Look at our communities, and perhaps we'll bring in the next point now around how can the community and people drive these ambitions. And perhaps we can turn to Hamira and talk about what good stakeholder and community engagement looks like, and some of the work that you've done on green spaces, and how that can contribute to this 15 minutes concept.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Hamira Sultan. I'm a public health consultant, and I'm also the director for Naturally Birmingham, which is a Future Parks Accelerator programme. So Birmingham has 591 parks and open spaces, and when people first hear that, there's usually a bit of a shock that Birmingham's as green as that. A lot of people see concrete in our city, but we are blessed to have this amount of public open space. But we're also a very, very big city as well. We've got over 1 million residents. So even though that number feels quite high, we know that there are parts of our city that just do not have access to green spaces. And with my public health hat on, we tend to see kind of clustering of certain things. So deprivation is a really kind of is one of the key factors or connectors to all this entire thread for me, really, where you have high levels of deprivation, you have poorer health and wellbeing outcomes, you have less community engagement in some respects, less community connectedness. There's also issues there around access to green space as well. So one of the things that we've been trying to do quite a lot in the Future Parks programme is look at those parts of Birmingham. So we've got a particular pilot site south of the city in Dorbury Fields. It's in the ward of Kings Heath and Brandwood, and for anybody who's watching this or is from Birmingham and knows Kings Heath quite well, you'll know it's a ward of two halves. You've got the kind of the Kings Heath side with the high street and various side roads off that where there's more gentrification, and then you've got the Brandwood side of Kings Heath and Brandwood, and that's actually where this particular park is. And that it's definitely a very different feel to the rest of Kings Heath. And we chose that specific park to work in because we knew that we needed to activate that park and activate the community to use it. There are other parks in the surrounding areas of South Birmingham. I'm sure Naomi knows some of these parks really well. So there's Cottage Park, which is our flagship park in the city, with huge amounts of social connectedness, social action, to the point that they've been able to raise £200,000 to build what they've called the shed, which is more than a shed. It's got toilets, it's got coffee making facilities, it's got indoor space. But when you look at places like Dawbury Fields, you know, that park could quite easily have been a park that just was kind of there and people didn't notice. So the importance of community activation there has been massively important. And that's the thing for me about green spaces is we know they're a fantastic source of health and wellbeing outcomes. We know they're great for improving well-being, but in order to do that, they have to be used. In order to be used, they have to be noticed. In order to be noticed, people have to have a relationship with them. And that's, or it has to mean something to them. And that's what we've tried to do in some of our parks and the Future Parks program, is help communities to kind of access them. It almost sounds quite counterintuitive because, you know, green space is there. It exists, but people don't always notice it. And this, for me, is some of the key issues that we're trying to address around access. Is, you know, Cottage has made itself, you know, the park that it is, because people use it, people want to see it improved, and people want to see the most getting, you know, coming from it. But we need to do that across the whole city. We can't just do it in those areas where there's already relatively, you know, good health and well-being, or there's relatively good community connectedness. I think green spaces in this agenda could be a really, really important way to get 50-minute neighbourhoods to actually work. You could kind of centre 50-minute neighbourhood around a park or a green space to really enable the community to use it and access it. I could talk forever about this, but I'll let someone else come in if that's helpful, Dan.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. I like the fact that you talked about community activation, and that the community connecting to the green space, and the green space connecting to the community. It almost acts as the glue, as bringing people together, and that people need to want to be there. I like the idea of the shed. You know, I'll look out for the sheds across Birmingham parks. Obviously more than a shed, but I like that concept that each park will have a shed. You know, it brings that community spirit that Birmingham people are so good at doing. Perhaps just a final point on the how, and I'll turn to Maria if we can, and just perhaps briefly just outline a couple of lessons that we can learn from the city of Vienna that you've worked in for so many years, and bring some of those lessons to Birmingham, so we're not, you know, that we're not repeating perhaps some similar mistakes, etc. If I can ask Maria to just highlight a couple of points, please.
Well, I think first and foremost, it's about thinking in networks, which means that it's not looking into, you know, a strategy for centers individually at each center, but it's moreover connecting the centers to each other. Because if we're talking about the 15-minute city, as a matter of fact, it means being able to reach from one center the next one using public transport within 15 minutes, just to give you an example. So it's a strong focus on connections and networks, and then it's about layering networks. Just to give you an example, in Vienna we have a network of green and open spaces aiming at allowing every Viennese to access it within 300 meters from any spot anywhere in the city. Then we have a walkability network with pedestrian boulevards, connecting actually everything we need for everyday life: social institutions, cultural institutions, public institutions, green and open spaces with each other, with perfect connections to be used by pedestrians. And then we have a centers network. So if you combine these three networks together, this is where you arrive at the kind of city that I'm talking about. Then, of course, it's about involving communities. And I think that there are excellent examples from international experience. I mean, Vienna has introduced a community grant scheme where everybody that has an idea of how to create a focal point in their own neighborhood, in the public realm, can receive a small grant and can do it all by themselves. It's been a huge success. So we've had more than 300 such initiatives realized within the past 3 years. But if you look into international experience, you will see numerous such examples: Athens or Amsterdam with the local city makers initiative, and so on and so forth. Literally every city, I believe, right now around the world starts, employing communities to transform public space. And then I think it's also about the issue of affordability and empty shops, which will be something that we will all have to think about clearly now, in the aftermath of the COVID crisis. So also, just to give you an example, Copenhagen, for instance, is actually, when it comes to new urban quarters, giving these shops to social initiatives and also small businesses at a very, very low rent for 3 years, and then gradually raises the rent, which is a very good idea of how to bring initiatives into such shops. Vienna has created an agency for temporary uses, which, as a matter of fact, matches young artists or young people looking for working spaces with the owners of empty shops, thus enabling us to create, lively neighborhood centers. And it may even go so far that the city creates an agency to rent small empty shops and then re-rent them to young people or artists or social initiatives at a lower rent. Because there are clearly many, many legal issues that go with this. And many shop owners would be open to the idea of giving their shop temporarily for any kind of, of uses, but need some kind of a template contract, so that several legal issues that go with it are solved. This is just a few examples, small examples of how to go about it. Let me just bring another one. If we think of new urban quarters, where we always have, I think that we can always use them as an opportunity and connect them to all the city parts to the benefit of the entire vicinity. But then if we use a new urban quarter, a larger development in order to create a new lively urban center, it's about thinking of mandatory ceiling heights at pedestrian level, which is something that we introduced in Vienna because we found out that many developers are very reluctant in creating shop spaces at pedestrian level because they fear that it will be tough to find people who would, rent them and operate them. So they tend to create only objects for residential uses, right? So yet again, introducing mandatory ceiling heights once again in planning will lead to new neighborhoods with shops there. And then perhaps a last example with regard to the house. In new urban quarters, you always are confronted with the problem that some shops will be operated immediately, but others remain empty for quite a while. And then you never get this kind of neighborhood feel that we all love, from all the city parts. So what we did in Vienna was to ask a shopping center operator to operate a street with the same principles as they operate a shopping center, which means that what we achieved was that this shopping street had the right mix of shops and services, and that all shops opened up at the same day. So these are just innovative examples, once again, from cities all over the world, as a matter of fact, of how to go about it. And to sum it up, I think it's about, once again, realizing that we have to think in networks and combine different types of networks with each other. I think the second important issue is that we have to use new urban quarters and new developments always as an opportunity. And the third issue for me is that we have to realize that when it comes to transforming all the city parts, you need affordable rents, you need temporary uses, you need to involve community, and you need to invest in the qualities of the public realm, just to mention a few examples. And to end with also a concrete example, yet again, from international experience, what Berlin does very successfully, and Vienna has actually also adopted following Berlin, is to not only to create a strategy for urban centers, describing all different urban centers and sub-centers that there are within the city and connecting them with each other, but also to introduce a center management and a center manager. Because one of the reasons why centers are struggling in many cases is that there are so many complex stakeholders, and you really need, I think, a permanent structure of governance structure, bringing these stakeholders together, most notably involving the quadruple helix, and doing this over long periods of time. So in a sense, everything needs a mother and a father, and centers do need them as well.
Cool. Thank you, Maria. Again, so much within that topic, and you've picked out some of the benefits of this approach at the same time, which I think it allows us then to move into what are the benefits of creating these 15 neighbourhoods. And if I could turn to Naomi and talk about the benefits from a community point of view. We've heard a number of, and I think it's coming loud and clear that communities play a vital role in these concepts, that the interaction with the spaces, but also the promotion of better quality urban living, etc. So what would the benefit of living in this vibrant and distinct neighbourhood be for communities? What are some of the benefits that communities can look forward to in the next 10 years if this concept does take hold?
Well, if I can just reflect on the what it's dependent upon is really good engagement with those communities right from the beginning. In all of the communities I work in the city, that are very varied, from very what would be considered deprived inner city areas to more affluent areas, there are community groups doing incredible stuff in spite of the challenges of the current times, but even the challenges 5 years ago. And they need to be facilitated and they need to be engaged with grassroots up. And because they do have a lot of the answers, and by engaging with people and listening to people's individual experience of how they experience space, you find out what you don't see on a map. You find out the places people say that's a no-go area. You can't see that on a map as an outsider coming out, but as a designer and a policymaker, you can facilitate them by, immersing yourself in those communities. And by working with them, they will get the best benefits, because when people are engaged to begin with, they get that sense of ownership of what goes forward because they've been part of making it. And so for those communities, they get that a much more direct stakeholding than if things are done to them. There's lots of inner city communities that have, literally had money almost thrown at them, but with so little engagement, or they're just told, here's the plan, tell us what you think. No, absolutely not engagement as far as I'm concerned. And they don't feel any kind of sense of ownership of those things. They don't look after it. They don't feel any incentive to look after it, but you look after what you have been part of creating much better. And even by the process of creating some of our engagement activities as architects have actually brought communities of groups together. And there's not necessarily been an architectural project in the end, but that we've sown the seeds through the process of engagement, of them forming their own partnerships, doing things better together. The other benefits, you know, when there's more people active in their communities, both active as in actually doing stuff in their communities, but just being active on, you know, walking the streets, cycling, it makes it safer for everybody, because the eyes on the street, you know, again, this is nothing new. Jane Jacobs, the like, you know, urban planners talked about this, that when there's more people around, then, you know, it makes it safer for everybody. So the people who wouldn't necessarily feel safe going out at 8 o'clock at night suddenly do, because there's so many people. And that includes children, you know, coming back to children again. And when you have much more people walking around their community, you get to know people. So when my 9-year-old son goes out to the shop or to the park, which I do let him, which is unusual, but I know that we know so many people in the neighborhood. Somebody's bound to see him who he knows. If he was ever in trouble, he can, you know, he knows his neighborhood so well. He knows where different people live that he could go to. And I think that's the kind of society we want to live in, rather than a society where, you know, you meet somebody 5 doors down and they've lived there 10 years and you just don't even recognize their face, because of the culture that we've kind of stumbled into, of getting out of our front door to a car and driving another place, and lost that connection. And that high streets have just become, they're designed around the fastest way of getting traffic flowing through, and not from the inside going outwards to the people who want to belong there. So I think the benefits to community can be great, but we've got to also look, as Maria was saying, overhead sort of those networks, to make sure that inequalities that already exist aren't reinforced, because there are some areas, and it's not necessarily just about deprivate, you know, there's some areas that have got brilliant parks and that are used already, and there's some that aren't, and similarly with other assets, community assets. So there has got to be some intervention again with the community, of correcting some of the sort of inequalities in the assets in the city. But yeah, I think the best examples really just can make a happy, you know, connect people and address issues such as loneliness and sense of purpose to people by just living in them. And I've seen it on my own street through pandemic. Some of people living on their own in the street, they know that they can put on a WhatsApp group if they need some milk, or, you know, and have said, you know, I hope this carries on, and I'm sure it will.
Thank you, Naomi. And that good engagement, I suppose, starts today and starts through this consultation that the Future Cities Plan and the City Council are actively seeking input into this plan, and how it then takes the next steps in development. So that good engagement from the communities absolutely is required. I'm just wondering now if we could hear from David on perhaps some of the business benefits of these concepts, and how the different networks that Maria touched on could help from a business point of view, and certainly in the work of innovation and some of the things that you picked out previously, David.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a whole thing here about citizen opportunity. And the innovation agenda has for so long been focused on universities and almost a linear relationship between universities and innovation. But actually, innovation happens wherever you bring people together, and you don't need a degree to be innovative. But what you do need to have is the aspiration to believe that there is an opportunity for you. And actually, to me, digital technology is almost a leveler if people realize what their skills are. Your average 16-year-old today is innately digital. They think in a digital way. They actually think in a different way, I think, to your average 30 to 40-year-old, certainly your average 60-year-old. And one of the things that that I think that the sort of connected 15-minute neighborhoods can do is take that familiarity of your local and connect it with the next local and the next local, and actually point to the opportunity. So place gets linked both physically and digitally. So you actually create an opportunity. So if you work on the principle that a knowledge-based quarter in a city or an innovation district, and there are plenty of those around the world, it's about knowledge gain, knowledge exchange, and the application of that knowledge that leads to innovation. If you plug in the innately digital youngsters into that, then what you create is aspiration through inspiration. They get inspired by what they see. They understand that their innate skills are exactly what businesses are missing at the moment. And I've seen some fantastic examples of people with hardly a GCSE to their name who've ended up working in cybersecurity companies because they have spent their time in their bedrooms doing stuff on the net and are bringing a skill set that they didn't even really know they had until they were introduced to the opportunity. Now, I think that's what a knowledge quarter in somewhere like Birmingham could do. And there isn't technically a knowledge quarter in Birmingham yet. That is what we're in the process of trying to create. And at the moment, there are about 11 institutions working in and around us, and they run from where the new HS2 station is going to be up to the Birmingham's Children's Hospital. It's got 2 universities in it. It's got 3 academies. It's got an FE college. That's about 45,000 students. Now, they're not just based there, because if you actually look at BCU, 85% of their students commute to the university from all across the city. So how do you open that up and say, not just coming to the university, but how do you open that up to the local communities to actually inspire them to do something? So what you've got to then do is get those 11 institutions to become greater than the sum of their parts. At the moment, they're not, because they're not working together. They're working in silos. So the objective of a knowledge quarter is it's a curated environment where there's a voice that drives additive value. And I think there's a real opportunity, and catalyzed by the fact that HS2 station will open and actually, interestingly, connect us within 40 minutes to London's knowledge quarter as well. And in a similar time, actually, to Manchester's. And we become an interested, connected city from that perspective. So the knowledge quarter is about a place. We need to make it 24/7 living. It's not at the moment. It needs to be a desirable place. There are some nice bits in it, but there are also some less nice bits. They need to be changed. We need to create that safe environment that people can walk around. But it's about creating a vision for 2040 that is a city that is flourishing in the knowledge economies for the whole of the citizens of the city, not just the city core. So we actually, if I look from where my office is normally, I'll look into the city centre and have all the cranes and one thing and another. I can look the other way, and you're looking at areas that have struggled since the 1970s. Nothing has changed. So to me, provide opportunity by connection is what I'd like to see happen with, and the knowledge quarter will, I hope, achieve that.
I'll aspiring the next generation, and touching on your previous point about knowledge is sustainable. And one of the points in the plan is about locally grown first, and I think tapping into that student bank and the skills that are not yet realised, I think, is extremely important. I suppose that perhaps a tedious link into green space, and that the green spaces aren't realised, by many. They don't tend to find them, and we have. And Amira, you touched on green spaces throughout the region and the vastness of them, and the interconnectivity of them could be improved, and the accessibility of them could be improved. And I suppose some of the benefits of doing that, perhaps you could talk about how from a community point of view, what it does for communities, having those green spaces available and connected, and perhaps linking in the Route to Zero action plan around some of those thoughts as well, please.
So I guess really in terms of the benefits of green space, you know, the evidence base has really been growing over the last, you know, kind of 10 years, really. Improvements to physical health, improvements to mental health, and actually the actual links to well-being and how being in physical space, in green spaces, sorry, that's actually stronger than physical health benefits. What we're also now seeing more recently, and this is really kind of starting to emerge from the COVID-19 experience as well, is the whole, it's not just about kind of being physically in a green space, there's actually about being connected to nature. You know, it's how often do we actually stop and really notice birdsong? One of the things that I remember, one of my strongest memories actually from during the first lockdown, when COVID-19 hit, was you could be walking around the streets, they'd be empty because all the cars were at home and parked in their driveways or wherever they park normally, and you could hear birdsong. And I remember my little boy at the time, who was just turned 3, and even he was noticing that. And you know, for me, that's, you know, so when we're talking about green spaces, I'm talking about all kinds of green spaces here, even the verges, grass verges in front of our houses, you know, where some people park their car on, unfortunately. But you know, it's the ability to notice that and kind of, you know, see that has huge benefits for people. So we're talking here about kind of, I guess, that, you know, the green space utility. It comes in all different shapes and forms. And so, you know, this is why I try not to talk about parks too much. As wonderful as our parks are, you know, green spaces are much more than that. I think one of the things about you, yes, you're right about the connectivity as well. Some of the things that we're seeing come out from other parts of the country, where we're seeing they're called green ground maps. I don't know if any of our panelists have seen them, or anyone who's listening to this has seen them, but London has produced them, and now Bristol and Edinburgh as well. And when you look at them, they look like an underground map, how you would connect various, I don't know, tube stations or what have you. But actually, when you zoom in, what they're showing is how connected our green spaces actually are, or could be, depending on where you are in the country. And some of them are now also kind of being modified to actually show you on how many different steps, how many steps would it take for you to get from one park to the other, rather than getting into your car and driving. And also, you know, a lot of our green spaces in Birmingham are connected to the canals as well. You know, Birmingham boasts about having more canals than Venice, but I would actually be saying that in terms of how they're used and how much they're noticed and how accessible they are, that definitely needs some more work. Just even simple signage to let you know that there is a canal that you can jump onto to enable you to walk from one place to the next. I recently discovered a part of Birmingham called Icknield Port Loop, which is kind of just around one of our major hospitals. It links onto Edgbaston Reservoir, and you wouldn't realise it, but once you get onto that part of the canal, 15 minutes, you're actually in the city centre. And it's phenomenal. I've lived in Birmingham most of my life, and I'm kind of ashamed to say that I didn't know that. And but you know, people don't know what they don't know. If you don't know it exists, why would you know to use it? So I think for me, one of the things about kind of about 50-minute neighbourhood is the power to connect. To connect not only people, because, and I completely agree with Naomi's point as well, is when you do walk and you're not in, when you know, and you're not in the box of your house, moving into the box of your car and then moving into the box of your office, the ability to connect to people when you're just walking or cycling, it's phenomenal actually. And I think, and this is part of, and another thing as well is, you see that people are far more likely to say good morning or say hello to someone in a park or a green space than they are on the street as well. So there's something about being in that environment that just makes it okay to do that. And I do wonder how much of, if we could move to a 50-minute neighbourhood in the way that we've just described, you'd get that kind of experience or that permission to actually do it on the street as well, because it will just be an extension of it rather than be a boundary of this is where the road is, this is where the pavement is, and this is where the green space is. In terms of the Brum Breeds agenda as well, yes, there's a and Route to Zero. There's a huge climate change, kind of a priority that we now have for the council. And I keep coming back to, yes, we want people to not drive around the city centres and so forth. We want people to kind of leave the car behind, but the environment has to enable that to happen as well. When we look at kind of health outcomes, only 10% of health outcomes are due to the NHS and actually healthcare intervention. All the others are what we call the wider determinants of health, and the time that you spend in your environment completely impacts upon the choices that you make. For some people it's not a choice because that's the only option available to them. If they're surrounded by fast food takeaways with no decent shops, that is what they will eat. So so I think there's huge overlap here that we could to get the ambition that Brum Breeds wants in terms of cleaner air, getting people out of their cars, the environment has to reflect that. And just one final point around climate change as well. Climate change in my mind and the action against climate change is two kind of main camps for me. One's around the mitigation, the really big stuff around, how do we change from dirty fossil fuel, and energy resources through to cleaner, greener energy. How do we get people out of their cars and to leave their car behind and actually maybe even not have a car? So that's the big stuff that needs to be worked on, obviously. But then there's also the adaptation side of climate change. And that for me is around the day-to-day stuff, the day-to-day way that people engage with nature, engage with green spaces, engage with their environment that makes them want to look after it, makes them want to protect it, makes them want to own it. All things that kind of Naomi talked about as well is if you can get people to do those kinds of things, then actually it isn't that much of a leap then to leave the car behind. It isn't that much of a leap to not litter. It isn't that much of a leap to do other things that we know are really important for climate change as well. So yeah, quite an interconnected agenda, but could absolutely be achieved with the right kind of thinking.
Excellent, thank you. And I love that idea of the green-based map and connecting that to canals. That would be fantastic with step counts. You can imagine, handing those out to tourists and away you go. It's a way of promoting the fabulous canal network we have. That the more people that use it, the safer it gets, and the better quality investment that we can put into it as well. So absolutely, I think that pulls in some of the thoughts that we've heard throughout the last 60 minutes. And I'm really disappointed that we've got to end our conversation there. We've gone 60 minutes now, and time is against us. But we started with a strong why, and we've gone through the case for change and why it's important for Birmingham. We've gone through some of the how, and some of the network interconnectivity that we need to be looking at to realise that reason for change. And we finished with some of the benefits, and we've probably just scratched the surface of the benefits of this concept. So I hope everyone who's listening and the panelists have enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. And we look forward to developing this plan together. And I think that was absolutely part all the way through. We talked about community engagement, and this is a plan that we can all build together and help shape Birmingham over the next 10 years. So it just leaves me to thank our panelists. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your views. And thank you for listening. And as a final reminder, please submit your feedback and take the Be Heard survey. The link will be in the broadcast post. So you can click on that link and complete the survey. The council really does want to hear your views, and we need to hear your views, and you need to be part of this plan. So thank you again for watching. Thank you again for taking part, and it's goodbye from me.